A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Good Thursday to you. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms' Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad to be with you behind the microphone today. Coming up on the program in just a little bit, Stephen Gutowski of the Washington Free Beacon is going to be with us. We'll talk about nights 1 and 2 of the Democrat debate, because night 2 of the debate did not feature a single question about gun control. So over the course of 2 nights and almost 6 hours of debating, gun control maybe got 8 minutes, if that, of all of the debate time. What they did talk about was important. What they did not talk about last night was also kind of interesting as well, what they left out. So we'll get into that with Stephen Gutowski a little bit later on in the program as well. J. Eric Dietz from Purdue University's Homeland Security Institute is going to be with us. One of the things we did hear on night 1 of the debate was a lot of talk about magazine bans. And they've also been in the news recently because of California's lawsuit, New Jersey's magazine ban just upheld by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. So next stop for that might be the Supreme Court of the United States. Magazine bans are incredibly popular among gun control advocates right now. And they're doing, I think, a pretty good job of pitching support for those magazine bans for non-gun owners. People who don't own a gun, they're not going to be impacted by any sort of magazine ban. I think are more inclined to say, well, yeah, we should just go ahead and ban them. Well, at Purdue University's Homeland Security Institute, they've been doing some research into whether or not magazines and their capacity improve survivability. So the modeling that J. Eric Dietz has been doing involves looking at home invasion scenarios. And what happens if the homeowner whose home is invaded is able to defend herself with a standard capacity magazine, let's say a 10-round magazine, versus a 20-round magazine versus a 30-round magazine. Does the increase in magazine capacity improve her survivability? We'll get into that a little bit later on in the program. We also have a story from our criminal justice system. An individual, once again, charged with a violent crime who should have been behind bars and not back out on the streets. Also, we've got an armed citizen story for you. We have our good deed as well. But right now, let's get started with our conversation with Stephen Gutowski of the Washington Free Beacon. Well, Stephen, thank you, sir. It is good talking with you today. I appreciate you tuning in for, 3 hours of debate last night that did not feature a single stinking question on our right to keep and bear arms.
Yeah, that was not a complete waste of time for me. It was a fine debate, but obviously I'm mainly focused on the gun policy stuff, and they didn't get asked any questions on that, and nobody tried to bring it up on their own either, which is interesting. Kind of a waste of time for me.
Well, listen, don't think of it as a waste of time. Just think of it as what you learned by not hearing about gun control, because you're right. You didn't hear any of those 10 candidates who at some point over the next few days will probably refer to an epidemic of gun violence. We'll talk about this being one of the most important issues of our time. Not one of them, as you say, brought this up on their own during their opening statements, during their closing statements. Andrew Yang, tied everything back to his $1,000 a month proposal. But you didn't see Cory Booker, who has, made a big deal about his gun licensing program. None of them tried to tie their gun control policies into the existing topics and the existing format of the debate last night.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think you can certainly take something away from what wasn't said. And even from what was said in the debate the night before, in that when they were asked, that group of 10, they mainly reverted back to more traditional Democratic talking points of, instituting universal background checks and banning the new sale of assault weapons. Whereas the last 2 debates, when Eric Swalwell was in the race, and his main platform was essentially the confiscation of assault weapons, you saw a lot more radical positions being taken a lot further left of the traditional position of national Democrats on gun control. And now with him out of the race, having achieved 0% support throughout his time running, it seems that everyone has reverted back to the more traditional position that Democrats have had, was sort of less radical, and even to the point of not talking about it at all last night. And I think that's interesting.
Well, I think it was a Pew poll of the top election issues for voters right now, and gun control was not in the top 10. I imagine Michael Bloomberg has several 100 million reasons to try to change that, and ways to try to change that going forward. So I think that there will be a push to try to bring gun control up as a big issue. But you're right. Eric Swalwell had based his entire campaign on being the gun sense candidate, and it got him 0%. At the same time, I mean, if you did hear last night's debate, this was not a moderate group of Democrats who were up on stage. And those voices that looked or appeared moderate on stage, like Michael Bennett arguing against Medicare for all, the big criticism was, listen, you're just parroting Republican talking points, right? They did not want to engage. And so I have a feeling at some point gun control is going to get brought up again. And I think there's a really good chance that whoever the ultimate candidate is, they end up adopting a lot of Swalwell's policies or Cory Booker's gun licensing policies. And speaking of Booker, by the way, he went after Biden last night for the 94 crime bill again, and touted himself as a champion of criminal justice reform again. I just find it fascinating, Stephen. I mean, you know what the laws are in New Jersey. If you are caught, no violent crime, just caught with a handgun and you don't have a license for it, you're looking at between 5 and 10 years in prison. And Cory Booker spent a lot of time last night talking about the unfairness of the 94 crime bill, and yet he wants to put a national gun licensing program in place. You want to talk about mass incarceration? Try telling 100 million legal American gun owners, hey, you've got to get a government license to continue to own that firearm. I'm guessing would see massive noncompliance. And if Cory Booker wants to enforce that law, you're talking about mass incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, certainly gun control is the one area where most Democrats don't want to see reform of our laws to loosen or lessen penalties for committing crimes. And in fact, they want to make new crimes in regards to the ownership of firearms. So it is certainly an interesting tidbit there about how Democrats approach criminal justice in terms of wanting to reduce most punishments while wanting to make new criminals and increase the punishments for gun crimes. So that's certainly pretty fascinating. The way that works out in practice. But as far as your point about Democrats returning to gun control at some point in this primary, I think that's a guarantee, right? Like whether or not what we saw these last two debates is going to be the new normal of sort of trying to transition back to more traditional gun control policies from the more radical ones that they had espoused earlier, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, you have people out with the actual positions that aren't just talking points at a debate, like Cory Booker, who wants obviously gun licensing, which for everyone in the country, which would be a fairly radical position, given that only a small handful of states actually employ something like that at this point. But you saw Joe Biden at the previous debate call for a ban on the sale of all guns that aren't smart guns, right? Which in practice today means a ban on the sale of all guns, because smart guns are essentially a theoretical technology that isn't for sale anywhere in the United States at this point. So, he didn't mention that last night. You think with such a sweeping proposal, really the most radical proposal of the group, even including Swalwell. But he hasn't talked about that at all since then. And he didn't say anything about it last night. So whether he moves back to that position or whether or not he realizes that, he didn't mean to say that, or who knows? I reached out to his campaign after that and they didn't respond. So we'll see. But certainly there's going to be a gun control forum hosted by Giffords and March for Our Lives. That was just announced today, so that'll be in October. So certainly there will be at some point a move back to talk about gun policy. Whether or not they'll go the Swalwell route, the more left-wing route, or they're going to stick to what they've done these last two debates of more traditional, universal background checks, assault weapons ban. It remains to be seen.
Well, and I suppose it's interesting to give us something to write about in October when they have that forum. But one thing that we're not going to hear at that forum put on by Giffords and March for Our Lives are any questions that actually delve into, okay, how are you going to enforce these laws? And that was something that I was disappointed by with the moderators in the first night of the debate, where we did hear a gun control question. It was really superficial, both the questions and the answers. And I don't think the moderators know enough about this issue to really ask some of the tougher questions. And obviously gun control groups aren't going to ask those tougher questions. And when you reach out with a tough but fair question to the Biden campaign, you just don't hear back from them, right? I mean, I think it's really easy for these candidates to avoid delving into the nitty gritty. I mean, Jake Tapper asked, all right, so you support Medicare for all. Does that mean you support raising taxes on the middle class to pay for it? But you never heard Jake Tapper ask, all right, so you support a gun ban. Do you support hiring new prosecutors or building new prison beds to enforce those laws?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are legitimate questions, right? About the implications of these policies, especially Cory Booker's plan. And I think it would be fair to ask, and it would be competent, it would be appropriate to ask about, the enforcement mechanisms for these things. Like, if you believe in banning assault weapons and you believe in a mandatory buyback program to enforce that ban, what happens when people don't comply with that buyback, right? This is the key question. This is why it's confiscation, because it's mandatory. If you don't sell your gun back to the government, give it back to them, forfeit it, destroy it, whatever, you become a felon. And how do you enforce that? I mean, so far when we've seen these things happen in at the state level, magazine bans like New Jersey's recent one where they banned the possession of magazines that had previously been legal in the state. Most of the time, it's not coupled with any sort of actual enforcement, right? They just sort of make it illegal. If you happen to get caught with one of these magazines while committing another crime, generally, then they will add it as a tack-on charge. But if your goal is to remove all of the assault weapons from the country, so-called assault weapons as defined under your bill, which, the definition for that term can vary fairly wildly because it's based on, cosmetic features essentially, and not on the functioning of the firearm or the caliber or whatever, as your viewers well know. But if your goal is to remove those weapons from the country, those firearms, just making it a felony to have them and then not coupling with any sort of enforcement mechanism is not going to reach that goal. So are you willing to, have some sort of enforcement mechanism, have some sort of effort to go through the country and make sure that people are complying with this law? I mean, that's a very big important question, right? I mean, because what would that look like? What would an actual effective enforcement mechanism for a mandatory buyback program look like in practice in America? Because I don't think people would like the answer to that question, most people.
Oh, yeah, no, I think it's very telling that we're not seeing that question asked and candidates are not volunteering that information, because I think you're right. I don't think that it's something that the American people would really be on board with. They don't really poll the question, are you in favor of throwing millions of otherwise law-abiding Americans into prison for owning a firearm without a federal license? Stephen Gutowski of the Washington Free Beacon. Oh, go ahead.
Round them up. Like, how would you find out who's breaking this law? Right?
It's a really good question, and again, we've got these Second Amendment sanctuary counties around the country. I think it would be very easy for them to say, listen, just like San Francisco or LA is not working with ICE, well, we're not going to work with ATF. We're not going to work with FBI to enforce these federal gun laws. You want to enforce them, we're not going to stand in your way, but these are federal laws, so you be the ones to enforce those laws. And again, gun control advocates who love sanctuary cities when it comes to immigration law would attack these same counties for doing the same when it comes to the Second Amendment. I could see that happening. Hopefully we don't get to that point, but If a lot of these candidates have their way, that's maybe where we're headed. Stephen, as always, sir, it is good talking with you. I appreciate you coming on the program today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your week. Make sure you're reading Stephen Gutowski at the Washington Free Beacon, and we'll be talking with Stephen again here very soon. So as Stephen mentioned, March for Our Lives in Giffords has announced a gun control a roundtable or a gun control forum for Democratic candidates taking place in Las Vegas the day after the second anniversary of the mass attack there on the Las Vegas Strip. That's going to be coming up in October. We'll have more coverage of that on bearingarms.com this afternoon. And, you know, it'd be great. I don't think it's going to happen, but I wish that we would have at least one opportunity for these candidates who are really talking about infringing on the rights of Americans. We talk about this at bearingarms.com. I've got a piece about it today. Cory Booker and his gun licensing plan. When gun control activists talk about gun licensing, what they're talking about is making it harder for legal, law-abiding gun owners to exercise their constitutional rights. It would be nice if, when you've got more than a dozen candidates who seem to be on board with that idea, if there was some form of questioning that could take place that wouldn't involve softballs being lobbed at these candidates. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen. Magazine bans, that's another one. I'd love to hear some of these candidates really get into a serious discussion with somebody who knows a thing or two. Maybe our next guest, as a matter of fact. J. Eric Dietz is with the Homeland Security Institute at Purdue University. He's been doing a lot of research into magazine capacity, and he joins us now to talk about what his research shows. Well, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's good talking with you once again.
Happy to join you.
And, you know, we've been hearing a lot of talk about magazine bans, magazine laws. You've got candidates running for president that are talking about wanting to ban magazines over a certain capacity. In New Jersey, their ban on magazines over 10 rounds just upheld by the 3rd U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. We've got a lawsuit challenging California's magazine ban. And when I talked to you last in Indianapolis at the NRA annual meeting, you had told me that you're doing research, and the Homeland Security Institute is doing research right now into whether or not magazine capacity impacts survivability of law-abiding citizens, right?
Absolutely. That was a thing that I talked to one of my students and had him take on that challenge, is building a computer model that would actually allow us to test just that idea. And so we built a home intrusion scenario into our computer's modeling scenario, and that allowed us to actually change the technology that is in the hands of the homeowner that's under assault from predators coming in with firearms. And we tested that on magazine capacities from 7 rounds all the way up to 30 rounds, 1 round at a time. And we were able to show a significant savings in lives of that homeowner that has more rounds in the magazine.
So in essence, the more the capacity that the homeowner has, the better off they're going to be. Is there any sort of, plateau? Did you notice that, okay, well, once we get past, 20 rounds, for instance, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference? Or did it really seem to improve the survivability with every additional round of capacity that the magazine would possess?
With the way we had the model set up, every single round added to the capacity. So theoretically, a 100-round magazine would have continued to add capacity. This is not really new. Anybody who's got military or law enforcement time knows more guns in a gunfight on the friendly side are good, and the outcome is usually better because of that. So I think this reinforces maybe our gut reaction to the magazine bans and the magazine capacity issue overall.
And so when people say, there's no reason why you would need or why you should want a magazine over X number of rounds, here's a really good reason, right? If you need to use your firearm for self-defense, the capacity of that magazine may very well improve the chances of you surviving, your loved ones surviving that attack.
That's absolutely what we were able to show, and we're in the process of getting that published as we talked the last time. And I want to get that out there so that the information is available to not just your viewers and your listeners, but also the rest of the public We've seen a number of the lawsuits challenged and saying that if magazine capacity was an issue, there'd be a paper published or there would be some scientific effort to show that. The problem has been is there hasn't been a lot of funding to do any research. Prohibition or to support firearms, holding. The funding has been withdrawn from on the federal side. That has some of that is just being relieved. So we're hoping that we can continue to do this work, continue to show the value of a firearm and the technology in the hands of the firearms owner that's just trying to protect their home.
Well, I look forward to covering more of your research, and thank you, as always, for coming on the program today. It is a real pleasure talking with you, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Of course. Glad to join you anytime.
Because I don't know about you, I find that absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate J. Eric Dietz joining us on the program to talk about that research. Hopefully, we're going to see that published here before long. All right, let's get to a couple of things that are actually in the news, have been published. We'll get to our Armed Citizen story. We'll get to our good deed of the day, and we'll also, unfortunately, get to our armed criminal story. In fact, let's start right there. As a matter of fact, our armed criminal story from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Suspected shooter in car wash murder has lengthy police record. And keep in mind, it's New Mexico right now. They've got their new quote-unquote universal background check laws on the books, right? And that apparently didn't do anything to stop Jared Holguin from allegedly committing a murder. KWT says the man that police suspect of killing another individual at an Albuquerque car wash has a, quote, long history of violence. Gerald Holguin, the suspected shooter, multiple arrests over the last 4 years. He's currently on the loose, by the way, facing first-degree murder charge. Back in 2015, so 4 years ago, Holguin was accused of firing a gun into the air from a moving car. Yeah, and then apparently nothing happened. 2 weeks before the shooting at this car wash, Holguin was arrested. This was just a few weeks ago. Holguin was arrested after a police report says witnesses saw him threaten a woman with a gun and ask her repeatedly if she wanted to die. Despite that arrest and other run-ins with the law, KOAT reports Holguin was out of jail and armed at the car wash when he was captured on camera firing a shot that police say killed victim Matthew Shaw. KOAT says this reminded us of another story about an accused killer with a lengthy criminal history back in May of this year. Police said that Darian Bashir shot and killed a University of New Mexico basketball player. Bashir was not behind bars, despite pending charges against him as well. And KOAT reports that prompted Bernalillo County DA Raul Torres to call for sweeping changes to the current system. He said, I think it's time for us to face the fact that the preventative detention system that we've been trying to work through in the last couple of years simply isn't working. No, it's not. And again, if you speak to law enforcement officers tomorrow on Cam and Company, we're going to talk with the sheriff in Cibola County, New Mexico, Tony Mace. If you talk to law enforcement officers around the state, they're going to tell you we don't need a quote-unquote universal background check law, which, by the way, is a misdemeanor offense anyway. What we need are tools to keep the most violent offenders behind bars, not offer them plea bargain after plea bargain after plea bargain when these cases finally do go before a judge, and to get serious on the most violent offenders that are the nexus for violent crime in Albuquerque and across the state. Again, that is not the case in New Mexico right now. All right, our armed citizen story of the day from Nashville, Tennessee. News Channel 5, man shoots suspected robber at an Antioch ATM. Yeah, tell me you haven't had those moments, by the way, when you're at the ATM. Maybe it's late at night, you're looking around, your situational awareness is sky high. It is one of those most vulnerable moments, right? So it happened about 9:45 Tuesday night at the U.S. Bank on Hickory Hollow Parkway in Nashville. According to police, man was at the ATM and he was approached by an armed suspect. The victim pulled out his own gun, shot the suspect multiple times. Witnesses at a nearby restaurant heard the gunshots, called police. They saw the suspected robber running between a restaurant and the bank. Police ultimately found him in a parking lot. He was taken to Vanderbilt University Medical Center with critical injuries. Officers did interview the intended victim in this case. They say the investigation is ongoing, but again, right now, this looks to be a clear-cut case of self-defense there in Nashville, Tennessee. Our good deed of the day from DeKalb County, Georgia, CBS 46, reporting on an off-duty officer who saved the life of a child. It's hard to believe now that we're into August, but it is back-to-school time, getting there around the country. And it was a back-to-school evening that could have turned absolutely tragic were it not for that off-duty DeKalb County police officers. An open house event at Woodland Elementary School on Tuesday night. Mom says her 2-year-old son was gasping for air, wasn't breathing, and that's when Officer Darwin Jones jumped in. She says that Officer Jones took over chest compressions, back blows until he was able to dislodge a piece of candy from the toddler's throat. Family reunited with Darwin Jones yesterday, thanked him for his quick reactions. Officer Jones says he was happy that he could help. He said, quote, "It was a sense of relief because I've never done chest compressions and back thrusts on a 2-year-old before." He says to see him start breathing and moving around again, it was a sense of accomplishment. Well, again, in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing. Officer Darwin Jones there in DeKalb County, Georgia, we thank you very much for your good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms' Cam and Company. Thank you so much for being a part of the program today. Make sure, again, to tune in tomorrow when we talk with Cibola County Sheriff, Cibola County, New Mexico Sheriff Tony Mace, as well as giving you the latest Second Amendment news and information. And, of course, make sure you're reading BearingArms.com to get caught up on all of your latest 2A news throughout the day. We'll see you tomorrow.